Well, there's one other piece of language here. Him trying to make up sounds and talk English and talk American, write a little bit romantic poetry. The injury. From this hospital bed, I can hear an engine breathing somewhere in the night. Soft coal, soft coal, soft coal. And I know it is men breathing, shoveling, resting. Go about it the slow way if you can. Find any way. Christ, who's a bastard? Quit and quit shoveling. A man breathing and it quiets and a puff of the steady work begins slowly. Chug, 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 chug. Fading off. Enough coal, at least for this small job. Soft, soft. Enough for one small engine. Enough for that. A man shoveling, working and not lying here in this hospital bed, powerless, with the white throat calling in the poplars before dawn, his faint flute call, triple-tongued, piercing the shingled curtain of the new leaves, drowned out by car wheels, singing now on the rails, taking the curve slowly, a long wail, high-pitched, rounding the curve, the slow way, because if you can find any way, that is the only way left now for you. Meaning, I think, man sick and dying, perhaps in bed, there is no way out except no place to put the mind, except in this world, and with the details of this world fading, perhaps. But I was interested in that poem with just the refrain, soft coal, soft coal, soft coal, the Americanness of the words. So this brings up the question then, if you have these perceptions of specific detail, and you have a mind to observe the perceptions, and you have a mind to observe the appropriate language equivalent to the perceptions, language that comes from the same world as the detailed perception, language that comes from our, the real world of the senses and speech. What's poetry? Or how do you make a poem out of all that? Or to put it even more succinctly, if you could find the words, see, if you have the words, you can get the words, I guess, from your mind. How do you put them out on the page? If the subject of the poem is not the form, like the sonnet, if the subject is not the ballad, if the subject is not the inherited form, but the subject is the subjective form, if the subject is made up by your own body, if the subject is drawn only from your own mind with no reference to classical rhythms of speech or classical methods of perception, or classical methods of perception in the sense of, let's say, generalization, abstraction, philosophy, that's not exactly classical. Let's say the deteriorated classical of the 19th century, classical style of the 19th century, which had become sing-song, especially in America, abstracted, except for Whitman, of course, and a few others, Stephen Crane, some Melville, some Emily Dickinson. How do you arrange the patterns on the page? How do you arrange the speech patterns on the page? And so here we go into the question of Williams's prosody, which is a matter of exercise of the same mindfulness of detail as his exercise of mindfulness in perceiving the subject matter or the objects of the poem that he writes about in the poems. I've been thinking of what are the different considerations of mindful open verse forms. I made a very brief list composed of elements we've already discussed, just as academic reference points. If one were to analyze Williams's versification, what are the different inclinations he has in mind when he's putting the words down on the page or rearranging them on the page? First, we had consciousness of syllables and syllable count as he practiced and as his friend Marion Moore practiced. That is to say, arranging phrasings on the page with 4 syllables, 4 syllables, 4 syllables, 4 syllables, or 4-3, 4-3. Just syllables without any question of stress, accent, or vowel length quantity. He was very conscious of that because Marion Moore was doing that, and then Kenneth Rexroth used that method for composing poetry. 7-syllable line. It was also something suggested by Chinese, Tibetan, and Japanese poetry, which is counted by syllables. That was in the air. People knew about that. So that there was an increasing mindfulness of syllables, actually hearing syllable by syllable when you are thinking of the line, even when you are pronouncing it, and especially when you are arranging it on the page. So after a while, the ear hears syllables. For those whose breath is articulated into mindful speech, and those who are so mindful of speech they can even teach speech, there is a question of how you talk and how you mouth your syllables and how you pronounce your consonants and clarify your P's and use your lips when you are talking. And that makes you more and more conscious of syllables, especially if you pronounce it aloud before audiences of 27,000 people. Because through all that machinery, they got to be able to hear. Or over a microphone in the Museum of Modern Art, it's also necessary to articulate so that each syllable is heard clearly, so that there is no mistake in the intention of each syllable. So that's a lesson that was learned by Bob Dylan, certainly. Williams had some sense of that playfulness of mouthing, which goes along with consciousness of count of syllable. It's just a quality you develop, both the pronouncing and the pronouncing clearly and precisely and using your mouth, as I was just taught an hour ago. But that leads to consciousness of syllables. That is, consciousness of pronunciation leads you to be more conscious of syllable by syllable. And syllable by syllable mental awareness leads you to be more pronouncey. So, Marion Moore did do stanza forms by counting syllables and making arrangements of different butterfly wing-like patterns of syllables, stanza to stanza. Do you know her work, Bongi? Marion Moore. If you look at a page of her work, there'll be arrangements. Maybe I'll bring one of her poems in next time. Oh, there probably is one here that we could go. But I don't want to go into the syllable count as a field yet. I just want to make this list. Obviously, second, there's accent, which is built into earlier English prosody, so we hear it all the time. And when we talk, there is accent in the talk. I think Williams at one point said it was what's the opposite of dactylic, Bongi? The opposite of dactylic. Anapestic. I think Williams said, what is anapest? Da-da-da. If you think when you hear when I talk, you can say it might be some kind of dactyl. Williams thought that American speech tended toward dactylic, I believe. What did we decide?
Anapest.
Anapest. He said one or the other, I forgot. Da-da-da. Was that anapest?
Yeah.
I think he said American speech tended toward anapestic. Just if you want to refine your ear a bit and get out of writing ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, iambic, or trochaic. If you want to get out of writing two-syllable rhythms, you might vary things a bit by getting into the custom of being mindful of anapest. Ta-ta-ta. Does everybody know the difference between... Does everybody know I am, trochee, dactyl, and anapest. Raise your hand if you don't know those. How many is that there? I am choky. You don't know that, James?
I can't. I mean, if you asked me which was which, I couldn't say.
Well, you got the basic principle then. We don't have a blackboard. I forgot to order up the blackboard.
Da-da.
Well, why do it abstractly? Yes, I love a blackboard, yeah. Sorry, I didn't think of it before. I forgot. We'll get back to accents then. Well, but while Bongi and I went over this material Sunday night, well, we'll get to it when we have something visual. I don't want to get too hung up on it. Then, 3. But we should, since not everybody knows it, that's the basis of traditional English poetry and song was the count of accents, and these are the different the accentual system consisting of da 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 is iambic, and da 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 trochaic, da 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 anapestic, da 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 dactylic. Those are the simplest, and the nomenclature is taken from Roman and Greek forms, Roman and Greek count, which was count of vowel length, not of accent originally. Vowel length. Yeah.
I don't think there's any particular reason those particular rhythms became standard, sort of. When I think of like all the myriad of rhythms that could be used, when I see those particular ones, for some reason they got this following or something.
Well, it's a great mystery, because they don't seem to follow American speech. And yet they're imposed on the forms of American speech to compose poems. But they don't seem to follow the forms of American speech. If you listen, you hear the tongue tripping on a different rhythm. So it is said that they are the basic rhythms of English speech. But I wasn't around when they were speaking it, when they evolved that system of notation, evolving it out of classical models of notation of quantity of speech, that is, the vowel lengths, attention to vowel lengths, as they did in Greek and Latin, which we were talking about earlier in the term when George Balmer was reciting Homer. So there is a vowel length then as another element when you're mouthing, as well as a particularity of consonant pronunciation. There's also the long charm of vowel mouthings, the opening your mouth somewhat in hauling your voice, or making a theatrical, making a concert hall of your open mouth, and filling your open mouth with a big A-E-I-O-U. And like idiot wind blowing round in circles round your skull, from the Grand Coulee Dam to the Capitol. You're an idiot, babe. It's a wonder you can even still now breathe. That's Dylan's Idiot Wind, as he developed the vowel elongations in later singings after the original recording. But it's finally gotten to be idiot wind, as like a rolling stone, or whatever the tone is. So, that's sort of music finally, that vowel awareness and vowel energy and vowel physicality is musical tune element of poetry, or melopeic part of poetry. Now, the system of notation generally used two, three, four, five. This is a light. That's a heavy accents. These are accents. You've seen these around, haven't you? All over. Most everybody's seen all this around. Is there anybody that's never seen this put down on the blackboard? Huh? Okay, so that's iambic. And da 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 da, trochaic. This is Iambic Pentameter. Pentameter, 5 meter, 5 beats. Trochaic, tetrameter, 4. Let's see, we had our anapests. Is that anapestic? No, that's hexameter. Hexameter, 6 feet. 6 feet. 6 feet because it was a dance rhythm originally. That's why we have the Poetic Foot, because these were originally danced to in the Greek choruses. So the chorus would sweep across the stage, going da 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 da, or whatever more complicated beat they might have, like da 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 da, and at the same time chanting syllables to fit the meter. So that's why we have what we call the Poetic Foot, because originally it comes from dance. This is what, anapestic?
And that's what American speech is supposed to be like?
Why, you fools, don't you know? Can't you hear? That's excited speech. Anapestic is very often for excited speech, ecstatic speech. Why, you fool, don't you hear? Can't you tell? Oh, shut up. Keep it on, or get it on. Get it on is anapestic. Get it on would be anapestic. So there are elements of American speech, as William said, that stick to that pattern, or that fit that pattern. When you talk, there's sometimes une tendance to come out in that way.
You try.
You try. If you hear, then it's clear. So good cheer. You're not here. Dactylic. Da 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 da. Well, what? This is enough. Da 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 da. Da. Da 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 da. That would be dactylic trimeter. 3 trimeter. Any of them can be in a, monometer, 1, dimeter, 2 feet, trimeter, 3 feet, tetrameter, 4 feet, pentameter, 5 feet, hexameter, 6 feet, septameter, 7 feet, octameter, 8 feet, novemeter. Dactylic trimeter. My father specialized in writing iambic dimeter. When terse is verse, its zest is best. So I shall try to hammer my stammer and beat it neat, exact, compact. What remains to be done is maybe flesh those paradigm. These the word for these pictures, analyses of the rhythm, I think are called paradigms, or can be used, the word paradigm. Nice word. Like the word spectral is a nice word. Paradigm is a nice word. Is the spectral form of the meter. Wyatt. Yes. Forget not yet the tried intent. Wyatt that I was reading earlier, and that would be iambic. Trochaic. Had we never loved so kindly. Line would sound like that. Had we never loved so kindly. Anapest. We've had Anapest in our speech now, but with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail, is Byron. These are examples I'm taking from the back of the Norton Anthology, which has a little summary of all this. Dactyl. Black where her eyes is the berry that grows on the thorn by the wayside, would be the dactylic 6-foot meter. I got into this because Bongi, who is German, wanted to know what were the basic meters of the American or English language, and I hadn't ever tried to teach them before. Well, I have, but not in any kind of orderly form, and I haven't developed a way of teaching it. But apparently some people don't know it exactly, so might as well put it up on the blackboard. Lloyd, for instance, you've never gone through this, have you ever?
I remember it vaguely from junior high school.
You know, does it make any sense now? Yeah. It's easy. No big deal, actually. Of course, what's interesting are the more complicated meters. Like Howl is written in much more, basically stress meters to a great extent, but they are Greek dance rhythms, the names of which I don't know, like amphibrak or choriambic, which are like choriambic dancing. And I don't know actually what they are in terms of their, if you were to analyze them, but lines like Moloch, whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows, Moloch, whose factories creak and smoke in the fog, Moloch, whose... I forgot how, so can't use that as an example anymore. I can't remember it. Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy, judger of men, Moloch the crossbones solace, jailhouse and congress of sorrows, Moloch whose buildings are judgment. But I really don't remember it, so leave it alone. So those are in more complicated, longer meters, not just... This is the maximum we got to is three parts. What do they call it? Arsis and thesis. I think it's the arsis and thesis within the meter. Interestingly enough. The two parts of an iambic meter are arsis and thesis. Well, yes?
Did you work with the Greek jazz rhythms when you were growing up?
No, they're intuitive to the body, I think. Though I had them from Shelley, Hart Crane, Vachel Lindsay, some Milton, some Shakespeare, ecstatic poetry, and then from my own vocal cords and dancing and jacking off under bridges. I mean, the rhythms you get into in jacking off, actually, or in fucking, or they're basic body rhythms, those rhythms. Like pump, 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 pump. Basic orgasmic rhythms, I think. So they're just run through the body. Also, they're inevitable. If you're going to have it, if you're going to hear accents, you either hear it light or heavy. If there's going to be accents, there's going to be difference. So it'll be light or heavy. So accent, we got all that for the moment dealt with in a rudimentary form. Anybody wants to know any more, just come see me. Syllables, accents, vowels. Breath stop as the next measuring concept. In William's case, and in Robert Creeley's case, and in my case, and in Charles Olson's case, and in the practice of many modern poets, one way they divide the line when they're doing free verse, because these are all the elements still in open form verse I'm talking about, saying there's a shadow of syllable count, there's a shadow of accent, the shadow of vowel awareness, but there is a definite practice of breath stop. And that gets that's always been part of poetry, particularly part of song. Last night, Mushka, friend who lives in our apartment, and George Balmer and Tom Savage were sight reading Campion songs from the original music, which really got much better than when we started the term. That we have like a whole little musical group with flute that can do it now. Some Campion. We might, if anybody's interested, it might be good sometime or other to get back to song and have it performed more accurately for the breath than the Campion songs that I was reading. More accurately than we started at the beginning. But I was noticing that in song, they were discussing where do they take the breath. Reading the ancient music, there were technical discussions of where the breath was to be taken. And were there breath marks in those music sheets?
I didn't see any. That's usually something you determine either within yourself or with a teacher, wherever it's convenient.
I think that's part of the oral.
At the end of a phrase,
that's part of the oral transmission,
yeah,
rather than the written. Well, I think there are some there's no notation to show breath in traditional music of any kind that you know of. No mark for notation.
There's a mark very similar to the light, except it's more like a hill than a valley.
And there is a definite notation that can be used for
but
breath.
I've never seen it in any printed music.
I noticed that in the practice of trying to vocalize from the music sheets, a good deal of the discussion was where you take your breath.
And in wood music, they use a mark where you take the breath.
Yeah, I imagine in almost any wind instrument. Now, the marks for where you take the breath in poetry have always been the comma, the period, and the line. I mean, space arrangement on the page indicates the breathing. I think without the control of continuous comma punctuation and semicolons, colons, with the advent of the dash as an all-purpose gap of mind or speech, in meditation as in action. There also is this newer preoccupation with the line break as the spot where you take another breath, or you have a breath stop and you don't need a comma. And Creeley's practice was he would write little funny couplets like, if you were going to get a cat, if you were going to get a pet, what kind of animal would you get? With a definite breath stop in between the two verses of the couplet. And he always said that what he wanted it was that the two verses of the couplet be so far apart, so discrete, and so independent of each other that you could pronounce one, if you were going to get a pet, and then take a walk around the block and come back and say, what kind of animal could you get? What kind of animal would you get? So his image of the breath stop was you take a walk around the block and you come back. A real definite stop, gap. For the mind, for the speech. That's his style. That's his own personal idiosyncratic speech, he being Bostonian by nature. A stammerer of some sort. Stammering tipsy Catholic. Irishman. That's the way he talked. As they do in Boston sometime. A little hesitantly. Short lines. Space between. Walk around the block before the next thought. So there is the breath stop as a measure. Now, yeah, Tom Savage.
Some strange. I've noticed in reading Creeley, though, that his lines are so short that it's almost like a hyperventilation if you took a breath after each line.
Well, I think sometimes that goes on in Creeley. That's quite literal. See, he has this idiosyncratic breathing connected with either breath stop or certain pauses between words. But I think very often there is a real breath.
Didn't that do this one eye?
What did you say? What did you say?
What did I say?
You said something funny. And,
Oh, I was parodying Rinpoche saying, if you say so. If you say so, sir. Good luck, sir. Because I thought one eye, there was sort of like a haiku there. One eye, making his breath. Maybe. But I couldn't figure that one out. So I just said, if you say so, if you say so. But now so the breath stop is used different ways. You can have it for short, or you can have a different effect. The kind of effect that you get in Charles Olson very often, in which he's a very thoughtful man, full of intellect, and it takes a little time for the sentences to formulate themselves in his head, but when they do formulate themselves, they come out, and they come out long. They'll stretch from the margin on the left-hand side of the page and go all the way over the right-hand side margin, and continue. But when they continue, there's a break, so that's another line. So, and continue will balance that whole other streak of language I just emitted. So Olson's Maximus poems, if you notice, are arranged on the page to fit long and short breaths, physiologically emitted by the poet, either in the scratch a pen on paper as he thinks of a mind line and writes it down in one continuous stroke of pen, or whether he has to pick up the pen and then continue again and with a short line, or as it might be spoken. As I was reading it the other day, those few songs from the Maximus poems, I don't know if you noticed, there was a great variability in nervousness, so to speak. Not uneasiness, nervousness, but nervousness of riding along on a pure impulse and a very sensitive projecting outward and advancing into the thought or into the air with the words, and then stopping and containing all the hesitancies of thinking on your feet or writing directly as the mind produces images or as the mind moves. So moves there would be just one line, as the mind moves, which is just like, you sing also, you who also want. You have to look that up on the page in Don Allen's anthologies. So for a sample of the breath stop as a measure of variable, or a measure of variable length lines, or a regulation, if not a measure, a regulation of the line on the page, according to breath stop, in a most variable form. Yeah, Tom?
Now it seems Duncan seems to have refined this to a fine art.
Yes.
People remember the way he was sort of conducting himself.
Yes.
When he was reading.
Well, there he was cultivating other pulsations of waves of speech, or perhaps even there, to some extent, accents. Or I wondered.
He said he was counting heartbeat.
Heartbeats he's counting.
So he says.
Incredible. So he's counting time by heartbeat. That's something I never thought of. It's really, literally. Where did he say that? I forgot. Did he say that in the... I guess I missed that, but that's great. That takes a good deal of diffusion of consciousness throughout the body and mind to be able to do that simultaneously. Maybe just count the heartbeats until we begin speaking. I see.
As the words are arranged on the page.
As the words are arranged on the page.
How long a space he takes relates to the length between words on the page.
And that relates to the number of heartbeats. The space on the page relates to the length of time it takes to speak between the sentences, and that relates to a count of heartbeat. Of course, in Olson, the length of space on the page, the white space on the page, relates to the time it takes between one sentence and another, or one line and another. In Kerouac's Mexico City Blues, there's the same principle. Large spaces indicating long pauses, spaces for breathing, spaces for the breath, spaces indicating take a breath, mixed with commas in Kerouac. Another way of dividing a line on the page is dividing it by units of phrasing. Not so much the breath, because several units can be in breath. Perhaps even you could find 3 units in breath. Perhaps if you listen to your speech as you were talking aloud to dearest friend, you'd come to find that at certain heartfelt moments, mind dwelling in the heart, meaning heartfelt, your exposition would consist in triads, as mine just was for about 3 lines. That is, though there was one breath, there were perhaps 3 phrases within the breath, or 2 phrases within the breath, or 1 phrase in an isolate in a silence and an isolate word. So there are the spoken phrasings, and one could study those by listening to people talk or listening to yourself talk, and find little rhythmic units, little squiggly articulations of speech that after a while become familiar, or patterns that you can model your own writing on or simply take directly from the air and put on the page like magic. Unique specimens of isolate rhythmic flex. So you can imitate the sound of words in the air, or you can imitate the sound of words in your mind, what is called the subconscious gossip, so often in Buddhist meditation terms. The literal sound in your mind, as Kerouac says, the sound that you would hear in your mind is the first sound. The sound of poetry. The sound that you hear is the first sound that you would hear if you were standing at a cash register. If you were singing at a cash register with nothing on your mind. Sound in your ear is the first sound you would hear if you were singing at a cash register with nothing on your mind. So you could hear your own sound of your own talk to yourself. And they come in units of speech too, little rhythmic units. So you can divide the line by those rhythmic units and set it out on the page, scoring your own speech or scoring other speech or scoring common speech, but taking as a model all the little idiosyncratic rhythms that don't belong in the schemes of light and heavy accent, iamb, trochee, anapest, and dactyl. And that don't belong divided into monometer, dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, etc. As example, when I visited Williams, he had written on a 1948 prescription pad, "I'll kick your eye." This is something I've said any number of times because it struck me, or repeated any number of times. "I'll kick your eye," Y-U-H-E-Y-E, he had written. I said, how can you scan that in accentual meter? But he would appropriate that completely for his poetry. And there are a number of very short poems which are experiments in listening to little units of speech. Details, he called them. Her milk don't seem to... She's always hungry, but she seems to gain all right. I don't know. It's the mother talking to the pediatrician. Her milk don't seem to... She's always hungry, but she seems to gain all right. I don't know. Doc, I've been looking for you. I owe you $2. How you doing? Fine. When I get it, I'll bring it up to you. Detail. Hey. Great, hey. Hey, can I have some more milk? Yes! Always a gentle mother. Detail. I had a misfortune in September, just at the end of my vacation. I've been keeping away from that for years. Just an accident. No foundation. None at all. No feeling. I'm too old to have a child. Why, I'm 50. That's a little rhythmic lyric, without the lyre, without guitar, but little. So you couldn't call it lyric. It's not music in the sense of notes of music with it, but substituting for the old lyric form. I bought a new bathing suit, just pants and a brassiere. I haven't shown it to my mother yet. At the bar, hi, open up a dozen. What you trying to do? Charge your batteries? Make it 2. Easy, girl. You'll blow a fuse if you keep that up. So he was listening to what he heard around him, and for specimens of rhythm that weren't in the books already. To greet a letter carrier, why don't you bring me a good letter, one with lots of money in it? I could make use of that. Attaboy, attaboy. I think, isn't there last year from this poem we evolved a magazine, Attaboy, a literary magazine with student poetry. Attaboy, attaboy. So, I was just reading those to exemplify William's study of the units of phrasing, and we'll continue with this subject anon. I'm going up now to hear the end of Michael McClure's reading at 16th and Broadway in the Sorority House. If anybody is interested in hearing his reading. And I need a ride up there if someone can take